Hi, guys. Hi, gang. Special Thursday live. Second live in a week. Big week, big week. Today we are here to talk about the national plan to end Parkinson's, and I'm gonna try and get Drew on. Give me 1 second, guys. Let's see. Super easy. You never know. Hi, everybody. What? That was like magic.
Perfect.
I didn't even have time to complain about how long it was going to take.
I do feel like technology rarely goes that smoothly. That's awesome.
Well, and I heard that there was like some nationwide outage of cellular service, and I was like, uh-oh.
Yes.
Anyway.
Luckily, I am not an AT&T customer, so maybe
I am. So if you lose me, guys, you know why. Anyway, hi, Drew Hatter. Thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Drew, tell everybody your official title. It is Government Relations Officer?
Absolutely. Government Relations Officer at Michael J. Fox Foundation. Nice. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, I kind of prepped everybody for this last night and told them that after we all had some questions last week about the national plan, and that I reached out to you guys. We talked a little bit last week, and I asked you to join me today to answer everybody's questions. For those of you who are watching, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the comments section. There's also a question button. I can't promise that I'll be able to see that very well, but we'll do our best. If we don't get your questions answered through this chat today, then we will post it afterwards, and you guys can, of course, contact Drew or anyone from the Michael J. Fox team. I'm sure would be happy to help. So with that said, let us dive in. The topic today is the national plan to end Parkinson's. I think most people on this call will know sort of the basic facts about Parkinson's, but let's just remind everybody that there's about 1 million of us in America right now that have Parkinson's disease. While we'll have many conversations on this platform and others about the cost of the disease physically and emotionally to families, there's also a cost associated with it to the United States government. And that's a big old price tag, right? What is it now? What do we think it is around?
We have $52 billion a year, 52 billion. And so half of that, 25 to 26, right, is on sort of our federal side, right? Those federal programs, Medicare, Social Security, SSDI, disability, Social Security, disability, right? But I think also equally as important, more important, honestly, and I think something that resonates when I talk to a lot of congressional offices certainly is that other 25 to 26 billion is on patients, families, caregivers for their universe of out-of-pocket costs. So yes, very significant. We also, of course, we know with age being one of the major factors with Parkinson's, right? With an increasingly aging population, we do expect that to hit about 80 billion by 2037, I believe. So yeah,
$80 billion from the combined government pockets and out of the pockets of a family like mine. And so the national plan has a lot of goals, and it will do a lot of good things, not the least of which is hopefully offset some of the cost of the burden of it to Americans and to the government. So with that being said, maybe give everybody just like a very brief overview of what the plan is. And I know one thing we don't know is exactly what will come of it, but what we hope will come of it based on sort of other plans for other diseases.
Exactly. And we can certainly talk about that because I think as you've touched on a lot here on your account, I think we have a really good roadmap and a really fantastic case study of what that looks like. But yes, so National Plan to End Parkinson's Act, right? It's the first ever legislation to unite the federal government in a mission to end Parkinson's. We didn't really reinvent the wheel when we named the bill there, but it's not just to end the disease. Of course, the cure is the holy grail. It's the standard that we all set ourselves by, right? Certainly the Michael J. Fox foundation. But it's really, and you'll see it explicitly throughout the bill if you were to read it. Although I don't know if you're not me, why you would be reading legislation on your free time. But it's really to prevent, diagnose, treat, and cure. Right? It's that whole spectrum of the disease, and so it's kind of in two parts, right? So it is directing the Secretary of HHS, Health and Human Services, to develop this plan, right? A national strategy to address Parkinson's disease. And really, the bread and butter out of that is to have some priority recommendations to address this disease, right? Better pathways and strategies for those prevention strategies, treatments, diagnosis, and the cure as well, right? And so the most practical, like sort of the logistical, the operational arm of that, right, is secondarily the establishment of an advisory council at HHS, right? And this is to pull in all the leading experts, all the main stakeholders in our federal government. So for those that familiar with some of our agencies, right, the National Institutes of Health, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, the VA, the DoD, the EPA, Office of Minority Health, clearly listed out in the bill, right? And those are just our federal stakeholders, our governmental stakeholders. Also includes, very intentionally, a list of non-federal stakeholders, right? uh, a person with Parkinson's, actually two individuals with Parkinson's, and importantly, one of those required to be an individual with young onset PD. Also, of course, our scientists, our researchers, our clinicians, as well as importantly, and I think particularly because another part of my portfolio is long-term care and caregiving, also including a caregiver on that advisory council as well. So kind of again, it's really with the effort, there's so many more different delineated sort of buckets of things that the legislation is very comprehensive in directing and encouraging the advisory council and the plan to look at. For example, also finding ways to encourage research in the environmental factors, environmental triggers of Parkinson's, and then also more broadly as well, environmental triggers is explicitly in the legislation, but then as well more broadly the underlying factors as well. So that's just one example of some of the things that we've included and required, right, the advisory council and the plan to include, but it really is very nimble, very comprehensive, and wide sweeping, if you will. Yeah.
And so the plan is large and broad, right? The
Mhm.
concept of the plan could be very large and broad. I know for the National Alzheimer's Plan, and I talked about this last night on my
Yeah.
stories. For anyone who's interested in reading more about that, you can go to the NIH website. You can go to the Alzheimer's Association website. They do a very comprehensive discussion of what happened in the years after the National Plan to End Alzheimer's. I always get it wrong. It's NAPA. What NAPA did for Alzheimer's in the last 13 or so
Mhm.
years. And they set out 6 major goals to change the course of Alzheimer's. And the goal for this
Yep.
committee would be to recommend sort of a similar path of goals or a similar package of strategic goals to end Parkinson's. And how long, forgive me for not knowing this, and you may not know this, but how long does that formation take? Are we talking years? Are we talking a year? Once the council is put together,
Mhm.
what could we expect in terms of how fast?
Excellent question. And so there are some timelines laid out in the bill, right? There are various levels of reporting that the bill requires the secretary to do, the advisory council to do. So that's really so to have that accountability and to make sure things are, stood up when they're supposed to be, right? But it's no stranger that government isn't always the fastest moving or the most efficiently running thing in the room. So that's why, of course, it'll remain on us too to make sure that we're still engaged and urging along that implementation. But kind of roughly some of the timelines, right? We have a lot of those targets for those reportings around 18 months
Okay.
after the enactment of the act. But of course, once we get the bill signed into law, that is far from the end of our work on the national plan. It's then fully focused on making sure that it's stood up swiftly and with urgency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know or didn't see when I said this last night, in addition to all the other goals that you've talked about, the investment in research, at least on the Alzheimer's side, we can only hope for the similar trajectory on the Parkinson's front, has increased sevenfold
Good.
over the course of the last year since NAPA was passed. And what that translates into this year for Alzheimer's research funding is $3.7 billion in Alzheimer's
Yeah.
research funding. And someone asked me last night, how much of that actually gets in the hands of the researchers, and the answer is all of it. And there is significant checks and balances to make sure that the researchers get the grants that are being allocated for that. So, conceivably the plan gets into place, the research money starts flowing, things start happening. I think one of the things I've heard from your all's team that really sticks in my brain, and I hope people hear this and are as outraged about it as I am, that the Michael J. Fox Foundation, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, funds more Parkinson's research than the United States government at this point in time. Do we think?
Yes, we that is true, particularly for our plans for the upcoming years, and I believe that's for the case has been some time for the past few years. So I think some of the more broader numbers that you mentioned, and you've mentioned them really well, right? Alzheimer's is currently 3.7 billion, I believe, right, is where they're at. Back in 2011, when the National Alzheimer's Project Act was enacted, they were at about 500, just below 500 million of a difference there. To put that into further context, one more step with me here in 2022 for Parkinson's research. So these are all NIH, National Institutes of Health numbers, right? To put that into context for Parkinson's, we're at about 260 million. So, roughly about half of what Alzheimer's was 10 years ago. And again, it's not, in the neurodegenerative space, it's a rising tide that lifts all boats, right? So
Right.
certainly don't want to come off of any kind of funding aspect there, but just kind of pointing out those numbers and how the National Alzheimer's Project Act serves as such a wonderful roadmap for our legislation, the
Yeah.
National Parkinson's.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, not a
Yeah.
competition at all.
Yes.
We want a cure for Alzheimer's
Yes.
for all our friends in that space as well. And
Cool.
we, everybody knows this, but I spent 10 years of my career, more than 10
Yeah.
years, working in the Alzheimer's space. So I am not detracting from that. I'm proud of the work we did to get there.
Yes.
I want to do the same. I want us to be able to say the same in half the time. Let's make it our goal that we get that much increase statistically or percentage wise in half the time. So the good news is
Yeah.
that there really isn't, and I'm going to use a sweeping generalization here, but there really isn't any downside to putting this act in place. That a plan for curing and preventing Parkinson's doesn't have any kind of political bent to it, doesn't have any kind of
No.
bias. There's no sort of I can't think of the word I'm using, but there's really no downside to someone voting for this, other than we just don't exactly know what the plan would be until the committee is formed or the council is formed, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think exactly right. The non-controversial, the bipartisan, which is that's a rare it's a rare thing these days. I think that's really highlighted by the fact of of course, the national plan was passed out of the House of Representatives at the end of last year, which was just phenomenal progress there, and we had overwhelming and bipartisan support, well over 400 votes in support of that, which you just don't see too
No.
often these days. And it's also, of course, our sites are very squarely focused on the Senate now, because that's sort of our next up, right? Who's up next? And we currently have 1/3 of the Senate. Currently, their name is on, in ink, in support of the bill. More to come, certainly. And that's an even split 50-50 bipartisan support there, which we've been very, very intentional to try to help foster. So absolutely, I think definitely speaks to yes, the overwhelming support that we currently have.
So, and I think that's really important for people to hear. So I'm going to call it back out one more time, which is that 1/3 of the senators have already signed on to the bill. And of those 1/3, it's a 50-50 split. So this is not being driven by Democrats or Republicans. This is a bipartisan push. So right now, and just again, I want to call out the fact that it got through the House with tremendous number of votes. Tremendous. I mean, really can't really put that into context unless you watch C-SPAN a lot and you see how close the votes normally are. The fact that it went through with such overwhelming support and bipartisan support, I really think speaks to the legs it has now to get through the Senate. So right now it is sitting. Is that a good way to describe it? It has not yet come up for a vote. It is not yet out of committee.
Yes.
Tell everybody where it lives right at this
Yeah.
moment.
So currently, kind of as I've trying to simplify the process, and I think it's always kind of important to keep in mind to some of the nuances here, because there's a way that Congress should work or wants to work, or if you've seen how a bill becomes a law, and that's of course how I'd like to see it. That's how we'd all like to see it happen. But then there's a million ways in between that things can happen, right? But yes, sort of the process as it goes along right now. It's next to be considered by the Senate. That's sort of our last piece of this puzzle for the bill, and it would need to, again, through the normal process. It's called regular order, the regular order of legislative business in Congress, right? To go through the HELP committee, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. Get my acronyms.
Yeah. There's
Working
a
this
lot
term.
of acronyms in Washington, D.C. Anyone who's spent some time here,
Yep,
it's a
the
lot.
old alphabet soup, as they
Yeah,
say,
yeah,
right? Yep.
exactly.
So yes, that's where it is. It has been assigned to that committee, and so we have been working quite diligently with the members of those committees, the two leaders of that committee, Chair Bernie Sanders, right, and Ranking Member Bill Cassidy, Vermont for Bernie Sanders, and Louisiana for Senator Ranking Member Cassidy as well, to try to urge consideration for this, right? I think one of the biggest obstacles, actually, I'll just say the biggest obstacle that we're facing, again, it's not a lack of support, it's really just the bandwidth. I mean, I think you turn on the news and you see we have two international crises happening at the same time. We have so many different things going on in the world that requires Congress's attention right now. Not to and again, I like to focus on the more positive side of things, but it's no secret that we have a lot of challenges in Congress and sort of our political system and some of the division. And of course, this is something that's primed and just ready for that consideration. But it really comes down to sometimes trying to urge just creating some oxygen, right, in the vacuum that can be created for all the different priorities that are going on. So yes, that real next tangible step is to try to get a committee hearing, which is what we've been pushing for. But I think something that you've alluded to, and again, this is talking more on sort of the creative side, if I could,
Yep,
could claim that, or the
yep.
interesting way that Congress can work sometimes, right? For those that may not know, we're approaching a sort of a government funding deadline, right, on March 1st and 8th. They actually split it up into two. So Congress has to pass the federal budget bills to keep the federal agencies running and the government funded, right? And so there may, that we've been hearing, there is potentially an opportunity, a legislative package, a healthcare, a public health legislative package that may be able to hitch a ride with those funding bills. So if that opportunity materializes, which again we've heard folks are negotiating such a thing, we've been working diligently for the past, gosh, several weeks to try to get the national plan in Parkinson's on that priority list. Which again, when we're talking about bandwidth and so many different priorities, it's an uphill climb, but we've made really positive inroads there, also knowing that anything we do there pays off, right? Like I said, trying to get this through the regular process. But yeah, that's again, talking about a deadline of March 1 and March 8th. That's what we're kind of focused on this week and next.
So, for anybody okay, let's take a step back for one second.
Yeah,
So, for everybody who's listening, the potential is there that it could get tied to this funding bill in the next couple of weeks. Even if it doesn't get tied to the funding bill, the noise that we make around it right now matters, because then it will
absolutely.
be sort of like oh, the people are crying for this, not crying, calling for
Yes.
this to come through. Let's get it into hearing. So there's no downside to doing all of the outreach that we're going to talk about right now. Tell everybody, if they haven't already done the first step, what the first step would be.
Absolutely. The first step, particularly with us, you can actually reach out to, we have a write-in campaign. And really that first step in the broadest sense, right, is reach out to your senators, reach out to your legislators, right? And so we have a convenient tool that you can do that, a write-in campaign. You can visit michaeljfox.org/Senate, and it'll allow you to generate a pre-written email to send to your senators. And please do take the time, if you're willing to personalize that. That makes a huge difference, especially considering all the volume of correspondence that a senator's office gets. I worked in a congressman's office, and depending on how big your state is, it's only a fraction of what the senators have, having the entire state. So that personalization element is really key. And then for those, and let me make sure that I have my
Your notes.
yeah, my notes here, right? Because I want to make sure to give the the right information. Yeah, for those that have written, and then looking to take an additional step there, or just want another option, calls, if you're willing or comfortable doing that into your senator's office, is hugely valuable. Again, I spent many years as that freshman junior staffer answering those calls. You can actually hear, it's small offices that these folks work in, believe it or not, so you can hear the topics of these conversations. And I had a boss that would come in from time to time and say, what are the folks calling about, right? Just to get that quick finger on the pulse. So we want it to be the national plan that folks are calling in about when that senator asks. And so that number, of course, you can find your representative or your senator if you know it online, but the easiest way to do that is to call the Capitol Hill switchboard. I think we can hopefully drop it in the chat here, but that number is, if anybody is so quick at some stenography, but it's 202-224-3121. And again, that's 202-224-3121. And again, that's the Capitol Hill switchboard. They can help direct you to your member of Congress there.
And for anybody who has never done that before, when I was very young and just had moved here and was advocating for a completely separate cause, the idea of picking up the phone and calling a congressional office was really intimidating. I will tell you now that I've done it many, many times and seen it happen. Drew is not kidding when he says it's always like a brand new, right out of college, maybe a intern in college that's answering the phone. They are always incredibly polite. In my experience, they're always eager to listen to your story. This is their job. And they make, notes, and to Drew's point, sometimes verbalize what you're calling about. They report it into their boss, who then reports it in, up and up and up and up. So I think it's a very simple, hi, I'm calling just to, if your senator has already voted for or is assigned, aligned themselves with the bill, then it could be a simple thank you for doing that. And we hope you'll continue to advocate for a hearing or advocate for a vote. But if they haven't, it's a very simple, this matters to me and here's why. My sister has it, my mom has it, I have it, whatever the case may be, or I just really care about it. And that's it. It takes a few minutes. They ask you where you're from. Usually, I think sometimes a zip code. It's not a heavy lift. It really isn't. So the auto published emails, whenever I send them out, I definitely personalize them. I think it matters if you tell your story inside that note, if you can, and then just pick up the phone. And then, I'm a social media girl, obviously, so it can be underestimated to put pressure on them in other ways online, on what used to be called Twitter, whatever platform of choice. I think continuing in that way helps too. So all of the outreach right now matters, and not just from your family if you have it, or you personally if you have it, but advocate for your friends to do so as well, because it is a numbers game, right? This is a volume, this is a quantity game more than a quality game really at this point. We got to get as many people as we can to be, calling, contacting, bugging, just bug. So.
It's absolutely a numbers game, and so that's why we need to display that urgency. And it's also, yeah, exactly as you mentioned, it's we want the phones ringing, we want the emails coming in. And again, someone who's managed a mail system for a congressional office, there's a lot of ways that information is shared with a member of Congress. So I can't speak to how every office does it, but I know that a lot of them, there's a weekly or a bi-weekly mail report, right? And it kind of has a readout of what people are writing in about, and it's numbers based, right? A lot of the times it's in an Excel, and it's what were the top 5 things, right, that folks, or top 10 that folks called in, wrote about this week. And we want the national plan to end Parkinson's to be on that list, right? And I think particularly, why you, why a patient, why a caregiver, right? It's truly because that patient, caregiver, family, researcher, what have you, connection, that story is one of the most impactful things we can do in advocating for this bill. I think I spend a lot of time on the Hill. I spend a lot of time talking to staffers. They get it, I get it. We do these kind of interactions all the time, but really, I do regular weekly meetings with advocates on the national plan, and it's a completely different conversation, and so much more enriching when you can see that they're talking with their constituents about actual human experiences, and that lived element, and not just, as important as they are, and we've covered them today, the statistics, the costs, right? It's really all about that human element. So it's absolutely key. Absolutely key.
And so if for some reason it doesn't get attached to the funding
Yeah.
bill in 2 weeks and it doesn't come out of committee, it doesn't get itself a little hearing, the bill does not get a hearing, the chances are that it's going to sit for a considerable amount of time because of the elections, potentially, um, because of the elections, potential
Yeah.
lame duck session.
Yeah.
If we don't push the pedal right now, we could be looking at a year longer potentially.
Yeah.
Conceivably.
Excellent question. So we can kind of try to unpack that a little bit more. Right? I think my strategic approach, I'm going to get this copyrighted, is just sort of the optimistic opportunism, right? So it's closing no doors, realizing that doors are still open even when one closes, right? So yes, this package for the next 2 weeks or however Congress decides they want to do with funding the federal government is our initial aim because we think in this immediate term, it's our best option, right? But we still have options moving forward, right? There is time, and we'll be pushing for regular order, right? Those committee hearings, and committee consideration. But Allie, something you mentioned exactly that, the clock is against us, right? A Congress rather. There's all these terminologies are not so helpful, but a Congress, we're in the 118th Congress, right? It's already half over. It's a little more than half over, right? It's a 2-year Congress, right? Matches with the election cycle that you're probably familiar with. So, we have the rest of this year to try to get this out of the United States Congress, or else we'd unfortunately have to start again, and that's not what anybody wants, right? And of course, with being in an election year, and again, just trying to display why we come at this with such urgency and why we're focused on any and all pathways in front of us. The summer is, historically a slower time in Washington, right? That July, particularly August, early September, members of Congress and senators go back home and spend time intermeeting folks in their districts. So that's both a negative because less is going on here just on that legislative front in Washington, but it also is a positive, I will say, and an opportunity for you to reach out and try to meet with your representative senators when they are home and local, right? But then, yes, in an election year, as we approach that fall time, there's even less kind of going on and less on the actual congressional calendar of when they're in town. So yeah, it kind of starts to become not only a numbers game and what we need to present to folks, but a dwindling numbers game of just those opportunities for votes, committee hearings, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the other thing is if people want to call and ask for a meeting, by all means, if you live in the DC area, or if you in your district, when you find out they're in their district, you can actually see, for those who haven't seen it before, there's a
Absolutely.
published congressional calendar. It tells you when they're in Washington working and when they're in their home states working. Definitely reach out, ask for a meeting. You don't need anyone to give you permission to do that. You may not get it,
Absolutely.
but
Yeah.
they will absolutely take it. Sometimes you can't get in with the actual member, but you can get in with a legislative aide or someone on their health staff, who will listen and report back to their boss. So meetings are helpful. The one other question
Yeah.
I was going to ask you was, are there specific senators who have not yet signed on to it that are important to this process that if our members are friends are watching, they could reach out to? Is there anyone in particular that we're like, oh, if only we knew somebody in so and so's
Yeah.
office?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I see some of it getting dropped here in the chat, which is phenomenal. So again, we kind of have tiered our folks, right? Of course, we're always focused on leadership, right? So leaders Schumer, leaders McConnell, our chairs, Chair Bernie Sanders, Ranking Member Bill Cassidy. But beyond that, and sort of the broader scope, right, are those members of the Help Committee in the Senate, and Democrats and Republicans, right? And so that's a big focus. And I think I saw the link drop there. So yes, take a look, check and see if your senator is on that committee, and if they have or haven't. Actually, either way, we still need their
Right.
support for the national plan. And then, one little caveat I would say beyond that is, of course, as well, we're just really kind of opening up to the Senate, right? This is a numbers game, and co-sponsors really do demonstrate the support. And really, one extra co-sponsor is one less excuse to not put the national plan on the Senate floor and pass it,
Yeah.
right?
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's also, as I said earlier, if you see that your member has already signed on, then thank them, frankly, because
Absolutely.
not only do they have to sign on to it, they still got to vote affirmatively for it. And hopefully if they get enough positive reinforcement, they'll help get it out of committee and into a hearing. So don't be shy in your
Absolutely.
praise of your member if your senator has already signed on. And also
Yeah.
your representative in the House. You know, if you have a relationship with a congressman or congresswoman in your district, and they've, well, obviously almost all of them signed on to it,
Yeah.
I think that thanking them for the support goes a long way, because it went by quickly and with, you know, such almost unanimous support. So thank you, Congress people.
That is an excellent point, Allie. And I'll just mention too, of course, because yes, those members of Congress within their state, they probably have a relationship with their state's senator, right? Those delegations, as we call them, those states by states, they're pretty close. They talk quite often. So even they can be a powerful advocate to a senator. And of course, yes, we're always trying to elevate the needs for the PD community. So absolutely.
And I think one of the other things, if you hear this online or if you hear it from a member, you know, that they're reticent to sign on to it because of cost. At this point, we're not actually asking them to allocate hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. We're just asking them to pass the act so that we can put the council in place, so we can come up with the recommendations, so we can move forward. So,
Yep.
you know, I would hope that there's not a lot of pushback on something like Parkinson's. I would think if there is, it's probably associated with costs, because government spends a lot of money, and, you know, members are responsible to their constituents to not, hopefully, overspend. And so if people get that feedback, is that fair to say, like, at this point, we're really not asking for a massive financial commitment right now. We're asking for the act to pass so that we can get the council in place.
Yeah,
True?
and
False?
specifically, absolutely, specifically
Okay.
with the bill, we are asking for no financial commitment at the moment. There's no, it's called an appropriation. It's just a specific funding line, a piece of funding, a literal dollar amount that says in a bill, right, you will spend this much money, or even sometimes you can spend this much money to help set this up. We don't have that at the moment. We know that the results of the plan are going to speak for itself. And it's not just, we didn't just decide to do that either. Again, back to the National Alzheimer's Project Act, that's the same approach that they took as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can't underestimate or overestimate or I don't know what the word is. I can't overstate how important that plan has been to Alzheimer's families. And it's not just about increased funding for research, which is a huge piece of it, because
Yeah.
obviously the goal is a cure. All neurodegenerative diseases, especially Alzheimer's, are so incredibly complex and complicated that even with all of that funding, you know, we're just now getting the very beginnings of potentially maybe disease modifying drugs, right? So it takes a long time to get any kind of benefit from that increased funding, but there's so much else that the bill will, or that the act will do, right? So it's creating better pathways to care. It's you know, assisting underrepresented and marginalized communities. It's
Exactly.
building awareness around the disease and the public and the need for support. It's all of these things in addition to money, which is very important for research, but there's so much more to the act than just the funding of the research, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another, you hit them all perfectly. And of course, there's plenty to walk through. Another one that stands out to me, right? I mentioned the caregiver representation on the actual advisory council. There's a provision too, right? That the plan, the advisory council, they're directed to look at, ways to improve and address sort of the mental and physical well-being of caregivers, families, the care partners, right? So yes, really a holistic approach.
Yeah, I mean, because so many people who are watching this and who will watch it afterwards are watching their family members suffer, and want a cure, or, you know,
Yeah.
disease modifying drug, but are also suffering themselves. That they're exhausted, they're burned out, they're financially burdened, they're in every way, shape, or form going along with the disease that their loved one has. So, you know, this act not only helps the people living with Parkinson's, but the people who care for them and that are caring with them. So yeah, I hope everybody will hear this. That I actually don't see any questions. You guys are too easy. I thought for sure you'd be grilling Drew. I prepped him for the onslaught. I'm trying to think if there's anything we haven't covered. If there's any questions, feel free to pop them in the comment section, guys. But I mean, it's a win-win in my book. It's a
Yeah,
win-win. It has really no downside, and we've seen that the members of Congress believe in its value. It's just a matter of making it a priority. And there, as Drew said, there are so many competing priorities, not just crises in the world, but just the sheer number of diseases in this country. There's just so
yes.
many things that people want and need from our government. And so we don't want to malign any member of Congress. We're here to advocate with them in a very positive way. But
Absolutely.
we just need to prod them a little bit. Just say,
Little bit
hey.
that. Yeah, yeah. One of my main professional skills may be very tactful annoyance. That might be, I don't
Yes.
know, it might be
Funny.
on my resume. No,
It's funny.
no.
That's what my husband calls me. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
No,
Joking.
Allie, the only thing I would mention, I think it builds upon sort of the encouragement that you gave to folks, to meet with their members of Congress. Absolutely. It's never out of the question weird or they'll never be taken aback by a request to meet. And it can be done when you call in, right? Just
Yeah.
trying to get those meetings. If you would, if you would like any assistance with that, if folks are wanting to reach out, we've certainly worked, and me along with our director of advocacy here at the foundation, with various advocates that have taken that initiative, right, to get a local meeting and have set it up. And we're happy to meet, discuss, go over some points, and really just help support you in any way that you would like. On top of that, if you're sitting here thinking, hey, I know a staffer that works, locally or in DC for an individual, or maybe I have a personal connection with any and all of these lawmakers, right? We'd love to hear about that. We'd love to work with you on that as well. So an easy way to reach out to us on those kinds of things, you can always hit our policy email inbox, and that's just policy@michaeljfox.org, policy@michaeljfox.org. So we're always happy to support folks that want to do more in that way as well.
Yeah. And I'll throw my hat out there too. I mean, if you are listening to this call and you are like, I can't bring myself to put my name to an email or phone call to my senator, I'll do it for you. I will literally call and say, hey, Jimmy doesn't want to call you, but I'm calling you for. I mean,
Yeah.
I think at this point, there's nothing that we won't do to get this passed. That's how important it is. I've seen it work on the Alzheimer's front, and I know we can make this happen. So I hope everybody hangs up from this in a few minutes. We'll see if we have any other questions or anything, but hangs up from this, go to the Michael J. Fox. How can I ask family and friends to send an email? Go to the Michael J. Fox website, and you can send the link. Drew, tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but the link that you send out, all of your friends and family have to do is put in their zip code, right? And it will populate their senators.
Yes,
Yes.
it will.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So if you find the link, we'll drop the link in here, or I can share it with you guys afterwards. It basically does all the work for you. So what you should ask your friends and family to do is just shoot out that link from the Michael J. Fox website. They throw in their zip code. It creates a letter directed to their senator. They can take a few minutes to be like, Allie told me I have to do this, but I'm doing it because she won't leave me alone, or whatever you want to say. And then hit send, and that's it. And I think that's step one. If you have a more engaged family and friend member who's willing to do more, give them the phone number for their senator, tell them to leave a message, tell them to call in. And then, I think posting on social media, I know social media gets a bad rap these days, but the more awareness we can build, it's exponential, right? So if everybody on here posts about the need for the national plan and the ways in which we can help get this through, it will snowball, right? So post about it, talk
Absolutely.
about it. Don't be shy, annoy people until they're like,
Yes,
unfollow.
absolutely.
Until
And
they,
thank you for mentioning that, Allie. Yes, absolutely. To the extent that you're able, please help us amplify
yeah,
this as well. If you've written, if you've called, try to find some friends, family, people you randomly talk to at the grocery store. I don't know, whoever you're willing to talk to. We need that snowball. We need that force multiplier. Yes, thanks for mentioning that as
yes,
well.
yeah. And I'll just end this by saying that I am just so grateful for the Michael J. Fox team, for all you guys are doing. You guys are out there pounding the pavement, beating down those doors, calling on behalf of all of us that have this disease. And we're inspired and grateful to you and to all of your team members. So appreciate you. Everyone hang up, go do what you need to do. Contact your senator today. Tell them you want it to go through. Let's get it through on this funding bill so that we can move
Yes.
forward. Because the longer it takes to get out of committee and voted into act, the longer it takes to become a council, the longer it takes until we get the money,
Exactly right.
the longer it takes until we get a cure. So we got to do it now, because nobody wants to have to start over with a new Congress at the end of the year. It's setting us back. So now's the time, folks. Now's the time. And then I don't have to bug you about it anymmer. Then I can go back to talking about Bravo and
Yes.
all
Oh
kinds
my gosh, don't get me started.
the
No.
next live we do together, Drew, I'm going to pepper you with questions about Summer House
Oh,
and Vanderpump Rules. No, I'm just kidding.
it's actually, that may be playing downstairs, so you might be a little more accurate than your.
I had to actually go downstairs and turn it off before I came up here. I was like, what is that noise? Why do I hear Summer House in the background? Well, thank you.
Thank
Everybody
you,
reach out
Allie.
if you have
Yes.
questions. Reach out to the Michael J. Fox team and feel free to ask me questions on my page. I'm here to help if I can at all. And let's get it done. We can do it.
Absolutely.
We can do it.
Thanks to you again, Allie, and to all those that joined here, right? I
Yeah, and
certainly
thanks to
can also
PD
value
family, who I
the
see is watching. She sort of got this question going.
Oh,
She
fantastic.
she unleashed the beast of
I love it.
my advocacy. So thank you to the PD family and anyone else who has been asking questions about this. It's important. So time to get it done. All
Absolutely.
right, thanks, Drew. Talk soon.
Hey, you as well.
Bye.